Good morning. I'd like to thank you all for being here, and I'd first like to start off by recognizing our elected officials that are here, and I do recognize Councilmember Larson in the front here. Thank you for being here. I am Assistant Chief Natasha Miles, NatoshiA. This morning, we will outline the incident involving School Resource Officer Tyler McCormick and Raquel Baldwin that took place on October 5th, 2018 at Haynes Magnet School. We were made aware that a video of the incident had been posted on Facebook on the morning of October 5th that depicts the arrest of Ms. Baldwin. On November 6, 2018, Superior Court Judge Anderson Cromer approved the release of the body camera video that also captured the incident, but ordered all images, with the exception of Officer McCormick and Raquel Baldwin, be blurred and other identifying information be redacted. The first 30 seconds of the video do not have sound because the body camera system takes 30 seconds to boot its audio system. Initially, we're going to watch only approximately 4 minutes of the video during this portion of the press conference. By standards set forth by the North Carolina Training and Standards Commission, officers are required to receive 40 hours of subject control and arrest techniques training while attending basic law enforcement training program. Exceeding the state standard, the Winston-Salem Police Department requires 56 hours of subject control and arrest techniques with additional practical training in use of force on a multitude of various other topics while in basic law enforcement training. Annually, as an aspect of mandatory North Carolina in-service law enforcement training, the Winston-Salem Police Department reviews our use of force training, the use of force control devices, including pepper spray, taser, Axon cameras, and firearms. We also intentionally incorporate de-escalation techniques in both classroom settings and in practical scenario-based training. Our officers are well trained in the appropriate application of use of force, the use of force verbal commands, and de-escalation techniques. In this video, Officer McCormick, who was assigned to Haynes Middle School as a school resource officer, was responding to the school guidance office, where he had been requested by school personnel in order to investigate the crime of disorderly conduct by fighting involving Ms. Raquel Baldwin. Officer McCormick had received a 40-hour basic school resource officer certificate through the North Carolina Justice Academy. Officer McCormick was wearing his issued school resource officer uniform and duty gear. The school resource officer uniform has a Winston-Salem Police Department badge on the left chest, clearly identifying him as a law enforcement officer. As Officer McCormick arrived at the guidance office in an attempt to investigate and speak to Ms. Baldwin, she stood up and began to walk away from Officer McCormick. At this point, with Ms. Baldwin having been identified as a participant in the disorderly conduct by fighting, Officer McCormick was within his legal rights to stop Ms. Baldwin for investigative purposes. Once Ms. Baldwin began to walk away from Officer McCormick, despite his verbal commands to the contrary, she committed the crime to resist, delay, and obstruct as outlined in North Carolina General Statute 14-223. As Officer McCormick followed Ms. Baldwin from the office and through the parking lot, he directed her to stop no less than 5 times before making physical contact with her. After making physical contact with Ms. Baldwin, Officer McCormick gave at least 17 directions to Ms. Baldwin for her to stop. When Ms. Baldwin refused to comply, Officer McCormick escalated force by putting her on the ground to be detained in handcuffs because of her refusing to cease her resistive behavior and comply with Officer McCormick's lawful commands. We will now play a segment of the video that captures the initial contact between Officer McCormick and Raquel Baldwin, the detention of Raquel, and the eventual return to the school.
Come here. Listen, I just want to talk to you about whatever you're involved in up here. Come here. Just come over here and talk to us real quick. Listen. What happened upstairs? Come here. I want to talk to you real quick. Come here. Let's go right here and talk. Come on. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Come on, let's go talk. Come on, listen, we're not going to let you. Let's go. Come on, let's go.
Let go of me, no, God, I need to go. Oh, me, let go of me. Oh, God, let go of me.
Stop.
Oh, me, let me go.
Stop.
Oh,
Stop. Stop.
God, let go of me.
Stop. Stop.
Mama.
Give me your hands now. Give me your hands. Stop. 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 Put your leg out. Put your leg out. Stop.
I'm off here.
Stop.
I am. I'm not even going.
It's fine if y'all want to act like this up here. We can handle it this way. That's fine. I'm videoing too. Stand up.
I need to fix my smile. I need to fix Did you let go of the one by myself?
No, you're not.
I still was.
792 killers. Show me out on the disorderly conduct. 2355 plate. $23.55 Pleasant Street. Let's go in the front door. Here, come here for a second.
I want to talk to this one.
Stay right there. Stop. Come on.
Could I have my jacket?
Come here. Seven on two. If I'm 10-4, no need for BK. I got one detained.
10-4, 21-14, 21-13, Canada.
Here, you want to go in the store? This way. Turn.
The next schedule of events, you will hear from Sergeant Paul Perry from the Elizabeth City Police Department, followed by another uninterrupted review of the video. At this time, I would like to turn your attention to Sergeant Paul Perry of the Elizabeth City Police Department. Sergeant Perry is certified by the North Carolina Justice Academy as a use of force instructor, and he conducted an independent review and evaluation of the use of force by Officer McCormick. While the Winston-Salem Police Department has its own staff of North Carolina certified use of force instructors and the Departmental Use of Force Committee, we wanted an independent review from another North Carolina law enforcement agency that had limited to no exposure to this incident before they were contacted. We intentionally did not use Piedmont Triad area law enforcement agencies in an attempt to maintain independence. We did attempt to contact North Carolina use of force certified instructors from both the North Carolina Justice Academy and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigations, but due to the short time frame, they were otherwise committed and could not assist. I introduce to you Sergeant Paul Perry, Elizabeth City Police Department.
Good morning, everybody. Notice right here, Ms. Baldwin displays a non-compliant behavior as listed in the use of force continuum on which she did not walk with the officer.
Come here.
All right, you hear the officer say, "Come here," and she replies, "I'm gone." This response changes her level of force as it pertains to the use of force continuum from non-compliant to a passive resistance. Additionally, it is a criminal act of resisting arrest, delaying the investigation, and/or obstructing an officer.
Listen, I just want to talk to you about whatever you're involved in up here. Come here.
All right, Ms. Baldwin looks over her left shoulder and seems to observe the officer following her. At that point, she diverts her path of travel to the right and continues forward, which indicates a continued act of resistance.
Just come over here and talk to us real quick. Listen. What happened upstairs? Come here. I want to talk to you real quick. Come here. Let's go in here and talk.
All right, the officer reaches out and makes soft hand contact with Ms. Baldwin. Prior to this contact, the officer was operating within the use of force continuum at the verbal and presence level. Once the officer touches Ms. Baldwin, he moves to a low end of physical force, soft hand techniques. The officer continues trying to convince Ms. Baldwin to comply with his instructions.
Come on. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Let's go talk. Come on. Listen, I'm not going to let you go. Come on. Let's go.
Let go of me, oh God, I need to go. And me,
Stop.
let go of me. Oh God, let go of me.
Stop.
Oh, me, let
Ms. Baldwin continues active resistance and escalates her force in trying to pull away from the officer.
me go.
Stop.
Oh,
Stop.
stop, bro.
Stop. Stop.
Bro, let go of me.
Stop. Stop.
Bro, no.
All right, as you see from that time frame, Ms. Baldwin continues trying to pull away and break free from the officer's contact, while he's continuing de-escalation techniques and tries to convince her to stop her actions.
Give me your...
All right, the officer takes Ms. Baldwin to the ground in a non-dynamic or explosive fashion. The force exerted to put her on the ground is very unlikely to cause injury to Ms. Baldwin or the officer. This takedown is an escalation still within the physical level of force.
Your hands now. Give me your hands. Stop. 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 Put your leg out. Put your leg out.
All right. You hear the officer raise his voice and sternly instructs, shouting to Ms. Baldwin to move her leg and stop because she still has not complied with any direction from the officer when he's spoken in a normal tone. In situations like this, officers sometimes escalate in verbal tone to express the magnitude of the event in lieu of escalating to physical force. If the stern tone and loud command prevent the escalation of force, there's a less chance of an injury occurring.
Stop. Stop. It's fine if y'all want to act like this up here. We can handle it this way. That's fine. I'm videoing too.
The officer placed the handcuffs on Ms. Baldwin due to her active resistance to his detention and takes her into custody.
Stand up.
I need to fix my socks.
No, you're not.
All right, from the point that she's handcuffed, Ms. Baldwin becomes compliant, and the officer de-escalates and assists her to her feet in a manner to prevent injury.
My shoe was.
792 Kelly. Show me out on the solar conduct. 2355. 2355 Pleasant Street. Let's go in the front door. Sit in. Here, where's your safe?
I want to go to this one. I ain't going.
Stay in the chair. Stop. Come on.
Could I have my jacket?
Come here. Seven nine two eight kills. I'm 10-4. No need for BK. I got one detained.
10-4, 12-14, 21-13 cancel.
Here, you want to go in this door? This way. Turn.
All right, throughout the physical encounter, Officer McCormick directed Ms. Baldwin to stop at least 17 times. Each of those 17 directions were disregarded, and Ms. Baldwin continued her resistive behavior and at times escalated the vigor at which she resisted. Officer McCormick never escalated his force above soft hand physical force. In fact, Officer McCormick remained at the lowest level of soft hand physical force possible. Also of importance is to note that Officer McCormick provided several instructions to Ms. Baldwin to comply with at each stage of the force usage and before escalation to the next level of force. When Officer McCormick realized the instructions at the verbal dialogue stage were not being followed, he was forced to slightly graduate his use of force. As you see in the video, Officer McCormick used very light force exertion to bring Ms. Baldwin to the ground. His actions were extremely deliberate and not dynamic in nature. Officer McCormick was in control of his body as well as Ms. Baldwin's body throughout taking her to the ground. This technique is designed to overcome resistance while producing very little risk of injury to the person with whom the technique is being applied.
At this time, we will watch another uninterrupted 4 minutes of the video segment. Following the video, I will make my final statement, and then we will have an opportunity to hear from the council representation for Officer McCormick, Chris Beechler, and David Freeman, and then we will conclude the program.
Come here. Listen, I just want to talk to you about whatever your involvement up here. Come here. Just come over here and talk to us real quick. Listen. What happened upstairs? Come here. I want to talk to you real quick. Come here. Let's get right here and talk. Come on. Come on, let's go. Let's
Get
go.
off me.
Come on, let's go talk. Come on, listen, I'm not gonna let you. Let's go. Come on, let's go.
Let go of me, on God, I'm in school. On me,
Stop.
let go of me. On God, let go of me.
Stop.
On me, let me go.
Stop.
Oh,
Stop.
fuck, bro.
Stop. Stop.
Bro, let go of me.
Stop. Stop.
Bro.
Give me your hands now. Give me your hands. Stop. 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 Put your leg out. Put your leg out. Stop.
I'm okay.
Stop.
I am. I'm not even doing anything.
It's fine if y'all want to act like this up here. We can handle it this way. That's fine. I'm videoing too. Stand up.
Can you hold on to my face? I need to fix my sound. I need to fix Did you let go of the one by myself?
No, you're not.
I still was.
712 to kill us. Show me out on the disorderly conduct. 2355 foot. Pleasant Street. Let's go in the front door. Too good. Here, come here for a second.
I want to go to this one.
7928.
Stand right there. Stop. Come on.
10-4, your response. Okay.
Can I have my jacket?
Come here. Seven nine two eight. Yes, I'm 10-4. No need for BK. I got one detained.
10-4. 12-14, 12-13, cancel.
Here, you want to go in the store? This way. Turn.
In compliance and consistent with the training provided to all Winston-Salem Police Department officers, Officer McCormick attempted de-escalation efforts and the proper progression through the levels of force before utilizing physical control techniques on Ms. Baldwin. In response to the initial community concerns regarding Officer McCormick's actions, and as observed in the video, Officer McCormick never placed his knee in Ms. Baldwin's back, nor did he place his hands against her face and push her face into the asphalt. As you just observed in the video, the incident lasted about 1 minute and 26 seconds before Officer McCormick took Ms. Baldwin to the ground because of her continued disregard for verbal instructions, and she tried to break free from Officer McCormick's grip. If Ms. Baldwin would have changed her behavior and resistance and become compliant at the time, any time during the 1 minute and 26 seconds interaction, she would not have been placed on the ground and handcuffed. You also saw that Ms. Baldwin continued her efforts to physically resist Officer McCormick while he was attempting to apply handcuffs to her wrist. The use of force incident and application of force has been investigated or reviewed by the following 4 bodies: Officer McCormick's supervisors, the Winston-Salem Police Department Professional Standards Division, the Winston-Salem Police Department Use of Force Review Board, and an independent use of force instructor, Sergeant Paul Perry of the Elizabeth City Police Department, who just dissected the video. As a result of those investigations, the Winston-Salem Police Department use of force investigation involving Officer McCormick has been closed with no policy violations related to use of force. Officer McCormick is on unrestricted and full duty as a police officer for the Winston-Salem Police Department. At this time, I will invite Officer McCormick's counsel, Attorney Chris Beechler, and Attorney David Freeman to the podium to address the audience.
Good morning. Again, my name is Chris Beechler, and I'm here on behalf of our client, Mr. McCormick. We have a few other things we'd like to say to add some context to the situation. First, I think it's safe to say that there's not an SRO in this department that wants to put his or her hands on a student. Officer McCormick had been an SRO at Haynes for several years. He loved his job. He had broad-based support from faculty, administration, students. He had friends. He helped coach the baseball team. This was his passion. I met with him last night, and he still wears a Haynes School bracelet on his hand because he still feels connected to those kids in that environment, although he is not there anymore. I think it's important for you to know what information he had at the time of the incident and why he did act the way he did beyond what you've seen in the video. When he approached the student in the lobby, the guidance office, he had been advised by school staff that the student had skipped her last class. She was laying in wait outside of another classroom, waiting to attack and fight another student. This was not the first time she'd had these issues. This was not the first school in which she had these issues. The school had attempted to address these issues with this student over weeks or months of the beginning of the semester. The student then followed this victim up the stairs to her next class. The victim was aware of this. She went directly to the office because she was scared. Officer McCormick then went to the office, saw that this would-be victim was frightened, hysterical, crying, did not want to be beaten up, did not want to get into a fight. He decided then he needed to go investigate Ms. Baldwin to see what the issue was. And that is where you see him come into the office. And as you saw in the video, for over 60 seconds, he asks her, requests her to come with him. I just want to talk to you about whatever. Come here, come over here and talk to us. He's with the principal. Listen, what happened upstairs? Come here, I want to talk to you real quick. Let's go back in here and talk. What you didn't see, but what was described is he put an arm around her shoulder in an attempt to turn her, encourage her to go back into the school. the entire time he is attempting to de-escalate her, walking away, which she is not allowed to do, as he is conducting a valid investigation. He could have detained her at any time. He is doing everything he can to get her to say, okay, I got an issue with another student, let's go talk. Instead, you've already been informed about the level of force that was used, pretty minor, in what I would describe from a defense perspective as a very controlled takedown. There was no body slam, there's no knee in the back, there's no face pushed into the ground. At one point, you might remember seeing that he had one hand on her wrists, trying to get the cuffs on, did not have his body weight on her. What you have not seen, and what I think will be made available to all, is the other hour and 1 minute of the video, which is telling. They get back to his office inside the school, and he attempts to speak to her. He's going to call family to come get her, as is what he is supposed to do. She needs to be removed from the school that day. While in his office, the first thing she attempts to do is get out of her handcuffs, move her handcuffs from behind her to in front of her because she says they hurt. They are uncomfortable. That's what handcuffs are. They are to control a person who cannot control herself in the moment. She's calm, she's controlled. As they walk into the school, you might remember there is no crying. There's no complaint of pain, of injury. She's not hysterical. She is complying. She gets back in his office. She cries some more. She is 14 years old. She's a child. And of course, it's emotional. He sits down and attempts to talk to her. And over time, she does talk. They talk about other students they know in common. They talk about other persons that she wants to fight. She describes having fought adult women. She describes the injuries, serious injuries she sustained from fighting. We never get to why she felt the need to bully another student, skip a class, and wait to pounce on another student. And you have not heard about that before today. That's the information that Officer McCormick had at the time he had to deal with this. He is allowed to detain anyone when he has to investigate what was already a crime and then being resisted. As soon as the student gets back into the office, he asks her, "What's the problem here?" She makes 3 statements. "I wasn't trying to fight anyone." That's not true. "I came to the office to call my mom." That is not true. The administration at the school, more than one person, perhaps the entire staff, knew exactly what she was doing. They could not control her. They asked him to step in his capacity as the SRO. He asked about the potential fight, and she responded, "I don't know who you're talking about." So you have 3 immediate denials, all lies, and he still attempts to ask, make sure she's okay, make sure he has the right numbers to call to get her home. All he wanted to do was discuss this, de-escalate it, and perhaps she would have gone back to class. We have no idea, but she made the decision over a minute and change to not comply with the police officer's commands. He did what he had to do in the least forceful, least restrictive ways that it can be done. Finally, you've heard some things about the student now is suffering. I'll let you know. Again, I encourage you to watch the entire hour. At the end, there's a point where the student asks him, "Are you going to work at the fair?" It's a civil, friendly discourse. Everybody's calmed down. He was calm the entire time. She calmed down after 20 minutes or so as she waited for her aunt. She still had the handcuffs behind her. She was comfortable. He adjusted them for her. He asked her to not move anymore. The more you move when you have handcuffs on, they can start to become more and more uncomfortable. He advised her that. She kept squirming. He did loosen them. He spoke to her about why they were behind her back and not in front, because he could not trust the moment that she wouldn't do anything else. Attack him, run out of the office, look for this girl that she wanted to fight so badly that morning. He did what he had to do. I'd like everyone to know that this has changed his career path. He is a wonderful officer, has been for 7 years. He loved being an SRO. He cannot be there anymore right now, although he would go back in a minute. To take a hit like this and be alleged to have done something wrong and have your job called for without any of the facts is just irresponsible. And on behalf of him, again, we invite you to watch the entire thing so that you have the full story, full context of what he had to deal with at that time. Mr. Friedman, please.
Officer McCormick's actions on that day were taken to protect our school children who were attending Haynes School and all the other schools. And on behalf of being a father who's had 3 children go through Haynes School, I want to thank him. He's there to protect our kids. He took the least restrictive means on that day to protect our children. What was he supposed to do? This young girl, and she is a young girl, was threatening students there at that school. She was bullying students there at that school. He can't allow that to occur. The administration said, come in and protect us. Then when he tried to talk to her, she continued to leave. He couldn't let her go back to school. He couldn't let her leave because if she leaves and something happened, if she does something to someone, the school's responsible, and if something happens to her, the school's responsible. What's he supposed to do? What he did. He brought her back in. He protected the students. He protected her from herself. And that's clear from the video. And we need to thank him. We need to thank him on behalf of the citizens. We need to thank him on behalf of all the other kids at Haynes School on that day that she posed a threat to. And because of his actions, there was no threat to them or to anyone else on the outside. Mr. Beechler and I wanted this video public because we think this information out in the public is extremely important. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that goes on, and people draw conclusions, and understandably so, based upon past experience. But we shouldn't condemn Officer McCormick for what we don't know. Something that occurred several weeks ago, and we didn't just wait until this video came out to try and display this information to the public. There was a meeting that was set up, I believe it was 3 Fridays ago, by Jim O'Neill, the DA, to facilitate him meeting with myself, Mr. Beechler, Bishop Fulton, Reverend Carlisle, and other members of the Ministers' Conference to convey this information. But not just to convey this information, to receive information back from the Ministers' Conference about issues that they were concerned about. And I've been doing this about 36 years. I would say it was sort of an unprecedented meeting because it wasn't a one-way, listen, you've got to do things from either side. It was both sides talking to each other and giving information. Because for our community, for the Winston-Salem community, for Forsyth, the more we understand and the more we have exchange of information and don't point fingers at each other, the better for all of us. I mean, we see not just here, but in the greater community what goes on when people get isolated and people sit and fixed in their own positions. And I believe if we can sort of continue to present information like this or have further meetings like we did several weeks ago, so we have free flow of information between law enforcement, between Mr. O'Neill's office, and between the Ministers' Conference and any other community service group, I believe we can utilize a situation like this to expand all of our knowledge and to make Winston-Salem a much better place to live. Officer McCormick did, he is here to serve and protect. And that's what he did on that day. And he's to be commended for that. Thank you.
At this time, we will conclude the press conference. And because there is an ongoing criminal proceeding involving Ms. Baldwin, we will not be taking any questions at this time. However, we will present the full 65 minutes of the video for anyone that would like to stay and view it.
At this time, we'll take questions from the media.
What are your thoughts after seeing the video?
My thoughts after seeing the video, the optical is very disturbing for me to see a 14-year-old child taken down. I have a daughter. But this officer did what he had to do at that moment. The truth is portable and you can take it anywhere. And after watching the video, we get to see the truth of what really happened. I think it was a premature call to call for Officer McCormick's job without first seeing the facts. So I'm grateful for the transparency of the Winston-Salem Police Chief, Katrina Thompson, our city officials, our district attorney, and everyone who has pushed for the facts to be shown. The jury is not still out on this one. The facts can be seen in the video.
So, just to make sure I'm clear, so has the minister's conference changed in terms of asking for McCormick's dismissal?
The ministers' conference will meet on Tuesday at 11 a.m. at Emmanuel Baptist Church, 1075 Shalimar Drive. We are a voting body, so I cannot make that decision for the ministers' conference. It will be made as a voting body. But I can say for myself, Bishop Todd Fulton, and I want you to quote, this is not the ministers' conference. This is what I was able to see on this video. I feel that the officer was in compliance, and if we're going to ask for this officer's job without knowing the facts, for those who want to do that, I'm not in agreement with it. But I am in agreement with changing policy, school policy. So if you don't want kids at 14 to be arrested, you need to make your way to Forsyth County School Board and talk to our newly elected school board members and change the policy. Officer McCormick followed the policy.
So, Reverend Carlisle, what about you? What are your feelings now that you've watched the video and all the information that's been brought out today?
At the NAACP, we appreciate having the ability to have dialogue with the police department, also with the district attorney's office. Through our conversations early on, we felt like we understood what had happened in the video. We wanted to see it today so that we could verify what we had already heard and discussed. The position of the NAACP that if the video today confirmed what we already thought had happened, that we would fully support the reinstatement of Officer McCormick.
Does that include if Officer McCormick decides he wants to go back and be an SRO?
That includes if Officer McCormick chooses to be an SRO. At the end of the day, at the NAACP, we felt like Officer McCormick acted for the safety of the students at Haynes, and we felt like that was most important.
You heard his attorney say this changed his career, changed his life. We've been here before calling for video, and every time that it comes out, everybody seems to be in agreement that the officers did the right thing. So from both of your entities' perspectives, is this going to change how you approach situations like this in the future?
Well, that was the exact reason why the NAACP had made no official statement concerning this issue at all, because we felt like it was important to vet the facts, to know what happened before we made any judgment call about the situation at all.
The Ministers' Conference stand, we received a lot of calls from the community. The optical in this tape, as a parent, is very bad. That is what engaged us. And as you said in the past, we've watched tapes, and when the tapes come back, the officers are in compliance. I'm grateful. I'm thankful that the officers are in compliance. I would not be standing here in agreement with the Winston-Salem Police Department if this officer overused his force, overstepped his boundaries. I trust the leadership of this police department, Chief Katrina Thompson. She's been straightforward with us. She's held us accountable, and she said to Reverend Carlisle and I both, I want you to hold us accountable. I want you to ask questions. This is not California. This is not Texas. It's not New York. This is Winston-Salem. And I'm proud to be a 52-year citizen of Winston-Salem. Any other questions? Thank you.